Thank you so much for joining us today. Dear friends, teure versammelte Freund, thank you for joining us. A hartlichen Dank für sein mit uns heint. I'm honored to welcome you to our annual memorial gathering here in Riverside Park this year, marking the 81st anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. We come together at a time when our gathering takes on greater significance with every passing year, as hatred and anti-Semitism increasingly poison the events of our everyday lives. We come together at this simple, unpretentious stone, der Stein, as we call it in Yiddish, to honor the extraordinary heroism of the fighters of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Der Stein does not derive its poignancy from its grandeur, nor from the fact that it was embedded here in 1947 as a promise that a permanent tribute to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising would later be built. Der Stein derives its meaning from us, because it represents unspeakable horror and magnificent heroism, because it possesses the silent scream of death and the determination to fight against all odds. So the fighters could say, "We will choose the moment of our death, not the Nazis." I'd like to take a moment to thank the Parks Department staff, our own David Goldstick, and the Riverside Conservancy for taking such good care of our gathering place. Also, a special thanks to Shane Baker for his tireless efforts in spearheading today's event, and to Feygele Jacobs and Moshe Rosenfeld for helping to coordinate our annual commemoration, and to Irena Klepfish, who advised us in our work. I'm sorry. A little later I say please don't applaud because it is a memorial gathering, but thank you. I know your intentions are good. As in past decades, we come together to pay tribute to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and while we know this event is taking place against the backdrop of the horrific war in the Middle East, we are reserving this hour to unite and to remember the Churban and focus our love, respect, and derech eretz on all who resisted, who fought, who lived, and who died. Also, as a reminder, we ask that there be no applause during our program, as the gathering is a memorial. 81 years ago today, on the first night of Passover, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising began. April 19th marked the beginning of an epic battle, not for victory, as the resistance fighters knew from the outset, but for the honor of our people. At 2 a.m., lookouts spotted the German artillery approaching the ghetto, and they entered the ghetto at 4 a.m. By 7 in the morning, their battalions were in position inside and outside the walls of the ghetto. The Nazis used the intersection at Mila and Zamenhof streets to stage their assault, intentionally while everyone slept. But the band of resistance fighters were waiting for them, hidden behind barricades at the four corners of the intersection. They suddenly opened fire with handmade Molotov cocktails and shots from their lone machine gun. Soon, the street was littered with the bodies of Nazis. This is how it began. And when the battle ended, Marek Edelman, one of the leaders of the Jewish Fighting Organization, wrote, "On May 10, 1943, this period of our bloody history, the history of the Warsaw Jews, came to an end. The site where the buildings of the ghetto once stood became a ragged heap of rubble reaching 3 stories high. Those who were killed in action had done their duty to the end, to the last drop of blood that soaked into the pavement of the Warsaw Ghetto. We who did not perish leave it to you to keep their memory alive forever." Time and again, history shows us that the darkest moments can give rise to opportunities for greatness, During these challenging times, all of us must commit to the hard work of protecting democracy, liberty, and freedom. The work is not easy, and there is always a price to pay. But it's a price we have to pay, because the evil that drives fascism and autocracy is ultimately no match for the promise of liberty that illuminates the lives of free people everywhere. Under these circumstances, our gathering and our message are more important than ever. We make the decision to come together today as a community and continue to return year after year to this simple stone to remember and to remind the world so it never forgets. We come together to resist oppression, to resist fascism and hatred, to resist small-mindedness and intolerance, and to commemorate the fight for freedom. Our parents and grandparents sang "Zog nit kemol as du gehst dem letzten Weg" as they faced certain death. Never say this is the end of the road. And indeed we are here because our work has not ended. Our journey does not end until every person knows the story and the lessons of the Holocaust. Our journey does not end because their fight is our fight. Our journey does not end because the hatred that sparked the Holocaust continues today in so many places. Our journey does not end until every life flourishes in freedom. Wir seien da. Noch einmal und noch einmal, again and again, dol v'dol, generation to generation. That is our legacy. May the invincible soul of those who fought, perished, and survived inspire us to be compassionate and to have the wisdom to find peace within and to build peace between nations. The price of freedom is far less dear than the price of forsaking it. Long live their blessed memories. Kavod sei Ondenk. You may have noticed a new sign over to my right, your left, which is a temporary sign that the Parks Department erected for today's event, but permanent signs will be installed within the next few weeks. We've been working on these signs for about 2 years. The first one retells the history of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and the second gives the context and purpose of our annual gatherings here on April 19th. And we'd like to give our special thanks to New York City Director of Art and Antiquities Jonathan Kuhn and Deputy Director Jennifer Lancis for guiding us through the process. And I'm very pleased that Jonathan Kuhn is here today with us and would like to say a few words. Jonathan?
No applause. It's a solemn occasion. Welcome. Here as a representative of Mayor Adams and Parks Commissioner Sue Donahue. I'm Director of Art and Antiquities for the city's Parks Department, but I'm not going to give you a history lesson because others here are much more qualified than I am to do so. This day holds a personal, that's fine, I'm good. Meaning for me, 32 years ago, I was hosting a Seder in my apartment, first night of Seder. My wife went into labor and our son was born that night, and his middle name is Elijah. So I feel a connection to this day for both personal and broader reasons. You have a long program, so I just want to place a little context to this sign. I'm not going to tell you we have these signs, and so much gratitude to Shane Baker and the committee to improve this plaza, Deborah Jacobson, and the others on the committee, Marcel, who served so kindly, and sometimes we disagreed in the language and we all are fallible. So we hope that people will learn more about the meaning behind the historical events this commemorates as well as the monument itself. We have 800 monuments in our parks. They range from modest plaques in the ground such as this one to triumphal arches. But all of them carry different meaning. But I think I just want to emphasize the fact that by your presence here today, you reinvigorate this site. There's no bronze piece, no stone monument, no work of art that can sustain over time. And indeed, the occupational hazard of the monument or the memorial is that it stays static while the world circulates and changes and evolves around it. But it's by events such as this and even private events where one person can be standing here and have a moment of meaning and reflection that the monument gains its true meaning and its true impact. And so I thank you all for being here. Our parks are sanctuaries, and we see this site as a sanctuary within the broader sanctuary of Riverside Park. And again, my gratitude to all of you for your interest in the site, your support of this site, upholding the meaning of this site. And I'm going to step away from the podium and let others more connected than I to this site to continue the ceremony. And thank you all for being here.
Thanks, John. I'm very pleased to introduce filmmaker Julia Mintz, who is with us today. Julia is a writer, producer, and director whose work focuses on narratives of bravery and resistance against unimaginable odds. Her recent film, Four Winters, is her directorial debut and a documentary about Jewish partisans who took up arms against Hitler's war machine deep within the forests of World War II's Eastern Europe. Those partisans reflected the same heroism as the fighters of the Warsaw Ghetto. Julia?
Hello, everyone. What an honor it is to be here today amongst all of you, our esteemed survivors, cherished memories of those who've descended. This is going to be a little beepy because I'm so short. And honored members of the larger community gathered here today. Today we commemorate an event that echoes through history as a testimony to resilience of the human spirit, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. In the face of these unimaginable odds of adversity, ordinary people, just as you and I and our kids and our grandkids, they were forced to rise up against tyranny, brutality, and most truthfully, extraordinary odds. I guess we ask the question, why? And for me, this was the same question that I asked over and again to each and all of the partisans who I had interviewed. How was it that you were able to manifest such extraordinary bravery in the face of such brutality? And how was it that you were determined to fight back with the idea to survive when your world had turned upside down? And what I learned over and over again through the many stories that were told to me was that it was because they wanted the life that they believed in, and that the world in which they had inherited through this tyranny was one that was absolutely unacceptable to them, and that life must go on with the sanctity and with the love and compassion to which they knew was part of our humanity. And I saw this over and again as I delved more and more deeply into the interviews that I did with dozens of partisans and those that lived this history and who survived the ghettos during these unprecedented and extraordinary times. So, thank you for that introduction, but I want to tell you a little bit about who I am. I've spent my life as an activist, as a humanitarian, really seeking to understand how people can rise up against extraordinary odds and how they're able to manifest this courage. And I've told stories of many, many people, but when I set out to make the film about the Jewish partisans, I came across a story about this young girl who fought back fiercely, and I thought, who is this Joan of Arc, you know? And I really wanted to learn about her as a human being. And then, of course, I learned much more deeply about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, of the 7,000 people whose lives were lost, and of course everyone else who was brought to their death. But what I really wanted to learn about was, how do we continue to live our lives and to be resilient, and what to do with this legacy of resistance. Shalom Yaron was an extraordinary man, and he was in the ghetto, and then he went on to become a partisan in the forest, and then to Israel, and became a very successful businessman, and ultimately had children of his own and lived this beautiful life. And Shalom was a deep inspiration to me. And one of the quotes, and I ended up ending our film with this, is that no person should succumb to brutality without putting up resistance. That individually it can save one's life, and in mass it can change the course of history. There's much written about resistance, and as I have set out on this journey to bring this film around the world, now to college campuses and high schools and communities far and wide, to tell the story of the partisans, one thing that comes up over and over again by the students and by individuals who are unfamiliar and not intimate with this collective history of ours is revenge. And they always ask, did they feel like they, made their revenge? And I have come to want and to share that resistance in no way was revenge. There is no revenge for what was ever lost. We can never make up for what is lost. So there's no revenge in this equation. And yet, the expression of revenge may be used over and over again when people think about those that fought back. But ultimately, what I've come to believe and understand is that those who fought were not only fighting to defend their lives, but they were often fighting to protect other people. They were fighting on the chance that one of them might survive to see another day, to build a life, to build a world in which they believed could exist, and which many of us are the proof of that. I believe very much like Khaye, who many of you may remember her sacred memory. She's in our film. Khaye said that hate is our fiercest enemy. Be peaceful, be loving, and work to create a world filled with kindness. Work to create a world of happiness. I'd like to believe that this is a battle. This is our call. This is very much what the legacy of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising teaches us, that our resistance and our act every day can be in their memory to create the world in which we want to live and to defend the world in which we live, because our humanity is sadly so fragile. What this history teaches us is not only about the strength within us to be fierce and determined and courageous, but the strength within us to hold love at the highest regard, and let that be our beacon to our resistance in their honor. I have many more things to say, but as I spoke those words, I sort of felt like that was a really nice place to land. I don't know that there's much more to say, but I would like to share with you a few stories about resistance and what I learned from the partisans. One of the things that happens with filmmaking is that so much ends up on the editing room floor, and so the backstories don't get to be told to those of you that are in front of the camera. I mean, in the audience, seeing those in front of the camera. But one of the stories that was so powerful was I asked each partisan who I had interviewed and survivors if they had ever saved a life. And over and again, the stories I was told surprised me so deeply. Luba Abramowitz, when I asked her if she had ever saved a life, she got very choked up, and she told me about her dear friend who was murdered in the field in a ferocious battle, and how she went back to get her, but she couldn't take her with her. She was too heavy, she was too wounded. And Luba had to choose her own life because saving her was impossible. But when I asked Luba if she had ever saved a life, this was the story she told me. Now, what was so remarkable was that 4 hours later in our interview, I learned that she was one of the partisans who was responsible for freeing Kosovo Ghetto that saved hundreds and hundreds of people's lives. They all were able to come into the forests toward the end of the war and not be liquidated. But the lasting mark for her was the life that she couldn't save. To me, what this tells me is that each of us sometimes may regret the acts that we couldn't accomplish more than those that we do. And I encourage each of us, and I try to remind myself this every day, to act in resistance and act bravely and courageously in the face of things that are so difficult, so we're never ever faced with the brutality and the decisions that our foremothers had to face. In closing, I just want to share one last quote of Khaye, which is, "Hate is our fiercest enemy. Be peaceful, be loving, and create the world of happiness in which you want to live."
I'd like to ask Daniella Rabbani to come up to sing for us, and I'm very thankful that Zalman Mletik is here today to accompany our singers. Zalman serves as artistic director at the National Yiddish Theater Folksbühne, and we're grateful that he's here. The other mic, Shifee, doesn't. Let me lower it for you.
The song is called Mein Shvester Khaye, My Sister Khaye, written by Binim Heller, a Holocaust survivor who ended up in Israel, and until he passed away, he lived there. The music is by Chava Alberstein, and it says, "My sister Khaye with the green eyes, Mein Shvester Khaye with the schwarze Zep, the long brown braids, Mein Shvester Khaye who raised me on Smoches Street in a house with crooked steps because my mother was out as early as the sun kissed the sky to earn a meager wage. My sister Khaye would feed us and take care of us and sing us songs when children get tired at night. Mein Shvester Khaye, she was only 10 years old, and the only thing she forgot to do was play. Mein shvester Khaye was burned in Treblinka, and here I stand in the Yidishe Medina, the Jewish state, the last person who ever knew her. And so it is for her that I write my songs in Yiddish in these schreckliche Zeit, because somewhere up there, she is sitting by God's right side, and maybe, just maybe, she could hear me. Mein Schwester Khaye mit die grüne Augen, mein Schwester Khaye mit die schwarze Zähne, die Schwester Khaye, was hat mir der Zeug neu smoschegas in Häus mit krumme Trepp. Weg von Stubaginnen, wenn auf den Himmel hat kaum Geld. Sie sah weg herein in Krom, verdienen dus biedne drobne Groschen dicke Geld. Und Khaye ist geblieben mit den Brüdern, und sie hat sie gekorn mit umgehielt. Und sie flexingen sie die schöne Lieder vor Nacht, wenn kleine Kinder vermied. Mein Schwester Khaye mit dir, grüne Augen, mein Schwester Khaye mit dir, lange Haar. Die Schwester Khaye, was hat mich der Zeugen ist noch nicht alt gewesen, kein 20 Jahr. Sie hat geräumt, gekocht, erlangt das Essen. Sie hat gezogen uns die kleine Kelb. Spielen sich mit uns, hat sie vergessen, die Schwester Khaye mit die schwarze Zähne. Mein Schwester Khaye mit die Augen grüne, hat Deutsch und in Dremlen sie verbrennt. Und ich bin in der Yidishe Medina, der Sammelletzte, was hat sie gekannt. Schreib ich auf Jiddisch meine Lieder in Tage die schreckliche von unserer Zeit. Bei Gott allein ist ja Bas Yechide, im Himmel sitzt sie Bas an rechter Seite. Weil schreib ich auf Jiddisch meine Lieder in Tage die schreckliche von unserer Zeit. Allein ist ja Bas Yechide, im Himmel sitzt sie Bas an rechter Seite.
I'd like to ask Noah Barron, Shane Baker, and Feygele Jacobs to come up. They're going to read in Varshever Ghetto.
Pesach has come to the ghetto again. The wine holds no grapes, the matzah no grain. But the people again sing the wonders of old, the flight from the Pharaoh, so often retold. How ancient the story, how old the refrain. The windows are shuttered, the doors are concealed. The Seder goes on, and fiction and fact are confused into one. Which is myth, which is real? Come, all who are hungry, invites this Haggadah, the helpless, the aged lie starving in fear. Come, all who are hungry, whilst children lie famished. Come, all who are hungry, and tables are bare. Pesach has come to the ghetto again. The lore-laden words of the Seder are said, and the cup of the prophet Elijah awaits, but the angel of death has intruded instead. As always, the German snarls his commands. As always, the words sharpened up and precise. As always, the fate of more Jews in his hands. Who shall live, who shall die this Passover night? But no more will the Jews to the slaughter be led. The truculent jibes of the Nazis are past, and the lintels and doorposts tonight will be red with the blood of free Jews who will fight to the last. Pesach has come to the ghetto again, and neighbor to neighbor, the battle pledge given. The blood of the Germans will flow in the ghetto, so long as one Jew in the ghetto still lives. In facing the Nazi, no fear, no objection. In facing the Nazi, no weeping, no wincing, only the hatred, the wild exultation of standing against him and madly resisting. Hark, how death roams in blood and in fury. Hark, how bullets and shells whine in flight. Behold, our history writes end to the story, with death heroic this Passover night.
In Varshever Ghetto. In Varshever Ghetto is jetzt Chodesh Nisan. Mein Mama tut an viel Ponim dem Schmeichel. Die Lippen versannen von Hunger verbissen, von Jontef, sie wären jetzt milder und weicher. Die Augen bei ihr heben wieder an scheinen, als wie einmal in vergangenen Jahren, und schäumen sie auf die großen Geweinen von jener vergangenen, weiter Sedoren. Nur plötzlich wächst dann sie gräulicher Yidishe, mit Steinen streckt sie die Hand ihrer Fromme. Anstatt anzuheben dem Sedel mit Kiddisch, die Sinn heben an, schweiche Moskau zu brummen. In Varshever Ghetto ist jetzt Chodesh Nisan. Und voll steht der Koss Eliyahu Hanovis. Nur wer hat der Seder da übergerissen? Gekommen ist trinken der Malach Amovis. Wie ständig die deutsche Sprache von Mustirden, wie ständig die Sprache von Befehle geniete, wie ständig sie sind gekommen, durch vielen Teil von dem jüdischen Volk zu der Schritte. Nein, es wird die Ghetto nicht helden mehr Siedlung von Nazis, was vielen auf jeden gehetzte. Mit Blut wird man wieder beschmieren die Stillen. Mit Blut von die Freie, mit Blut von die Letzte.
In Varshever Ghetto ist jetzt Chodesh Nisan. Von Schochen zu Schochen wird übergegeben, das deutsche Blut soll unaufhörlich sich gießen, kosmans wird ein Jid in der Ghetto noch leben. Für sie soll in euch nicht sein, kein Achnoe. Für sie soll in euch nicht sein mehr Katrären. Nur Sinne, Akschones und wilder Anoe, von stehen sie an Kegen, von können sich wehren. Und Herr, wie es Hilchen in Chzos ab die Schossen, und Herr, wie der Tod geht auf deutsche Spuren, und Herr, die Geschichte wird jetzt abgeschlossen mit heldischen Umkommen in Leila Shemurim.
I'd like to ask Shifee Losacco to come up, who will sing for us.
hast hat gebrennt. Sie gedenkst du, wie ich hab dich gelernt, zu halten a Speier in die Hand. Am Moid, a Pelzel und a Beret und a Hand in a Hand fest an a Gang. Am Moid mit a Sameten im Ponim hit op dem Säunes Karawan. Gezielt, geschossen und getroffen hat ihr kleiniger Pistol an Euto a Vollinken mit Waffen. Verhalten hat sie mit ein Kuh. Vertog von Waldereus gekrochen, mit Schnee in Landen auf die Haar. Gemutigt von Kleininken mit Sorgen, vor unseren neuen freien Tor. Gemutigt von Kleininken mit Sorgen, vor unser neuen freien Tor.
I'm very proud to introduce my sister, Lily Kshensky-Baxter, to speak. Lily taught women's studies at Emory University, served as director of nonviolence research and peace studies at the King Center in Atlanta, and after retiring as director of the Weinberg Holocaust Center at Atlanta's Bremen Jewish Museum, she returned to the King Center to serve as senior nonviolence educator and trainer. Lily?
Teure Havertes und Haverim, dear friends, I'm honored to have been invited to speak today at Der Stein. Of all the memorials to the Holocaust, this one is closest to my heart. A memorial to the heroes and martyrs I grew up with, in person and in legend, inspiring people of moral vision, committed to social justice, and represented in the glorious freedom fighters of the Warsaw Ghetto and their colleagues. Hirsch Glick, Vladke Mead, Michal Klepfish, Witka Kempfner, Arthur Ziegelboim, Monja Glaser, Baruch und Heike Spiegel, Khaye Palevsky, Yankel Tselemensky, Marek Edelman. I could go on and on. Many of these known and unknown heroes of the Jewish socialist resistance who survived Der Churban began new lives in New York and formed the community within which I had the good fortune to grow up. Over my desk sits a picture of my mother, already elderly and in a wheelchair, taken at Der Stein on one of my visits to New York from Atlanta, my home for the past 40+ years. I credit my parents and their friends in the Jewish Labor Bund, Arbeitering and its Schulen, and Camp Hemshech for teaching me of a Yiddishkeit that includes massive doses of Jewish heroism, loyalty, compassion, and vision. In Atlanta, I came to know a similar inspiring community through my work with the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. I had been active in the anti-Vietnam War and women's movements, and in 1979, I jumped at the chance to work with Mrs. Coretta Scott King as she was establishing the King Center. Almost all the people who had worked with Dr. King were still alive and eager to teach in the education programs I was running. Heroes of the civil rights movement like John Lewis, Dorothy Cotton, James Orange, Andy Young, Bayard Rustin, Ella Mae Brayboy. Here too I could go on and on. These vivid and admirable people echoed in so many ways my own childhood heroes. And what I have learned over time was that these two distinct communities, one that existed in Eastern Europe during the first half of the 20th century, and the other in the second half in the southern United States, an ocean and decades apart, these two communities were cut from the same cloth. Each group saw itself as liberating its own people, while also working for the betterment of all people. The love expressed by these activists towards their suffering folk gave birth to each movement. But it was the fierce urgency of now, as Dr. King would say, that propelled each. For the Bund, this urgency was expressed in the philosophy of Doigkeit, or here-ness, working in the here and now to improve conditions, and doing it within the nation wherein you lived, not elsewhere or some other time. A similar worldview was expressed in the cast down your buckets where you are philosophy of Dr. Booker T. Washington and his followers, arguing against the Back to Africa movement of Marcus Garvey. The impetus was to work for justice and human dignity for your people now, but also for your community now and all people, to be co-creators with all others who struggled for a bessere und schönere Welt, a better, more beautiful world, a beloved community, as Dr. King would say. Here's Coretta Scott King's description. The beloved community is a realistic vision of an achievable society. In the beloved community, caring and compassion drive political policies that support the worldwide elimination of poverty and hunger and all forms of bigotry and violence. In the beloved community is a state of heart and mind, a spirit of hope and goodwill that transcends all boundaries and barriers and embraces all creation. During the civil rights movement, the beloved community defined not only the ideal work to strive for, but also the movement itself expressed in the quality of its friendships. In his introduction to Vladka Mead's On Both Sides of the Wall, Elie Wiesel marvels at the solidarity in the young ghetto fighters. He writes, "The concept of friendship was never so sanctified as here. One wonders at the heroism of the fidelity of friends, just as one wonders at the heroism of the insurgents." Doesn't that also describe the students who participated in the lunch counter sit-ins and freedom rides? Think of the steadfast loyalty and bravery of John Lewis on the Selma Bridge. He knew he would be severely beaten or worse. Imagine Michal Klepfish protecting his fellow fighters by becoming a human shield, covering a German machine gun with his very body, thus giving his companions the extra seconds needed to escape. Think of Martin Luther King Jr., who never stopped, not for a minute, his nonviolent campaigns while always aware of the certainty of his imminent assassination. Or the teenage girls putting slips of paper into their bras with their names and contact info before climbing onto the freedom buses, knowing they would certainly be beaten if not killed. Think of Glatka Mead and her unstoppable fellow couriers, keeping mental track of a web of hidden adults, children, and their protectors, pulling off clandestine transactions of medicine, money, and arms while play acting Aryan teen girl cheerfulness. This loyalty, this obstinate determination to never give up, this hope for the future, encaptured in their two anthems. No surprise, the partisan hymn Wir seinen da and the civil rights anthem We Shall Overcome, both in their unique ways echo each other. So today, at Der Stein, we remember our heroes, the visionary, the brave, those who yearned for and gave their lives for a schönere und bessere Welt, a beloved community. Let's honor them and follow in their footsteps. Ashenim Dank.
I'd like to ask Francine Dunkel to please come up, who's going to share a little bit about her mom's experiences during the war. Let's see. Oh, it's very sensitive.
I am reading from Glatka Mead's book, On Both Sides of the Wall, translated
It's not working. I'm telling you, it's not working.
I am reading from Glatka Mead's book, On Both Sides of the Wall, translated from the Yiddish by Stephen Mead. One of our tasks as underground couriers operating outside the ghetto was the rescue of Jewish children. The relentless program of extermination carried on by Germans had left very few children in the ghetto. Of those still surviving, only a small number had been smuggled over the wall, for it was hard to find Poles who would shelter Jewish children. We spared no expense in trying to persuade Poles to hide Jewish children in their homes. The mothers who entrusted their children to us were close to tears. How hard it was for them to part with their little ones after having seen them through so many dangers. Would they ever see them again? Yet the anguish was mitigated by the hope that perhaps on the Aryan side, the children might have a chance to survive. Nellie and Vlodka Blit, a pair of twins, 10 years old, had gotten safely over the wall. Michal Klepfish had placed them with a family named Dubiel in a small house near the factory on Chernykova Street, where Michal was staying. Mrs. Dubiel, a kindly old Polish woman, had been somewhat disappointed. She had expected the children with Aryan features, not brown eyes and dark hair. Nonetheless, she took them in. The two girls spoke Polish perfectly and were careful never to mention the ghetto. Both girls were greatly distressed at being separated from their mother. They stopped eating, would not speak to anyone, and hid in corners. But though they sulked in the presence of strangers, they perked up whenever I appeared. They hoped that I would have a message or letters for them. "Have you brought us anything from over there?" they would ask the moment I would cross the threshold. If I brought them a letter from their mother, they went into transports of delight. Tell us, what does Mama look like now?" they would plead with me. And I would recount in detail my conversation with their mother, Fela Blitt, who had been a teacher in the Chesho schools. I used to meet her on my missions to the ghetto. The children calmed down somewhat when the Dubiels moved to the new quarters, which ran parallel to the ghetto wall. The windows of the Dubiels' residence faced the ghetto streets. On one of my visits to the children, they ran to meet me, crying, "Quick, quick, quick, come on in. We've got something to show you." They pulled me to the window and pointed to a woman walking about the ghetto. It was their mother. But we could only get a brief glimpse of her because just then the Ukrainian sentry noticed us and aimed his carbine at us. We withdrew hastily into the room. The Germans did not permit anyone on the Polish side to get close to the ghetto, not even to peer through a window. The little girls told me they saw their mother every day. "How did your mother discover your window?" I asked in astonishment. The elderly Mrs. Dubiel explained that her husband had happened to work in the ghetto for a few days. One day, the girls brought him bread and milk and begged him to locate their mother and give her the food. Mr. Dubiel found their mother and showed her the window of his house. Thereafter, every day, she went under the window, making sure that she was not being watched. She would walk slowly up and down, looking up intently at the closed windows of the Dubiels' house. The little girls would wait for her and peek through the curtain windows. And when the Ukrainian sentry is off on patrol, we exchange a few words across the wall, or even drop a note, Nellie told me. Excuse me. Of course, this was a dangerous thing to do. Someone might notice that was going on and report it to the Germans. That would seal the fate not only of the mother, but of the daughters and of the Dubiels as well. The girls accepted my warnings in silence and without objections, but their dark eyes looked at me in sorrow. I bowed my head with a sense of guilt. Why did I have to be the one to cut off the only source of joy left to these children and their mother? The children survived, but their mother perished in Majdanek. One of those twin girls was my mother, Nellie Blitt. She died on September 11th, 2023. The other, Vlatka, is my aunt, age 91, living in London.
And now I'd like to ask Sarah Gordon to come up. No way. Just you want to put it in your hands? You want it in your hands?
He said I should take this one. I'll try it.
Okay.
Dremlen, Feygl, birds are sleeping, and a stranger rocks your cradle. Dremlen, Feygl auf die Zweigen, schlaf mein teuer Kind, bei deinem Wiege läuft der Narre,
sitzt der Fremde und singt. Bei dein Vico auf der Nahe sitzt der Fremde und singt. Ist dein Weg wo gestanden, ausgeflochten vom Glück. Und dein Mame, kommt schon kein Mal nicht zurück. Und dein Mame, kommt schon kein Mal nicht zurück. Ich hab gesehen dein Taten läufen und der Rockel von Stein. Über Felder ist geflogen, sein verjossener Gewein. Über Felder ist geflogen, sein verjossener Gewein.
And now I'd like to ask Esti Zanoni to come up. I think she's accompanied by her dad. Terrific. Do you want this lower? It's very sensitive for my sorry. You want a chair?
Jüdische Kinder von Varshe bei M. Odlitzky. Die Flecken gehen in Schule, a Segen wie a Segen nein. Gelernt dort in alle schöne Sachen. Von Feygl und von Fisch, von Menschen, Wohl und Fein. Die Kinder Jüdische von Varshe. Die Jünglich pflegen spielen Ball mit Frieden. Die Mädchen haben lieb gehabt, sie putzen. A Schläfel in die Haar, a Blimmel auf dem Kleid. Die Kinder Jüdische von Varshe. Wie sie haben Mames Teile gehabt und Tates bis ihn später Nakht vernommen. Sie sollten Schichlech haben und herumgehen satt. Die Kinder Jüdische von Varshe. Wie geholt haben sie als Servet Lemper wohnen mit a Zieg zusammen. Gesingen Feygele hat sie früh, sie spät, die Kinder Jüdische von Varshe. Es hat den umgebrachten wildere Nazi, wie umgebracht die Teile und Liebe, ständig wählen mit Gedenken sie. Die Kinder Yidishe von Varshe.
And now I'm going to ask Zalman to sing a song for us. Zalman.
Hello, hello. Okay. Unter die polnische Grinen Kebeimelach Spielen sich mehr nicht kein Moyshelekh, Shloymelekh. Spielen sich mehr nicht kein Sorgelekh, Leilekh. Nicht auf kein Gräserlach, nicht auf kein Schneelach. Silchen schon mehr nicht die jüdische Stimmelach, von die Kundesemlach, Matterlach, Schimmerlach. Nicht die zerkrellte, zertrappete Zurlach, von dem Beweisen, von Dedem und Gvoralach. Streuer nat sind die polische Beimelach. Teutzen in Yidishe Heimen und Heimelach. Teutzen in Gesselach, Chorev die Heiselach, wo es verstecken sich Kinder wie Meiselach. Yidische Kinder mit große Eigelach, schwarze Azoi wie mit Pachat verlaufene, Eigelach frumme mit Pachat verlaufene, unter dem Unglück, dem bräunem Getroffene. Unter die polische Grünenke Beimelach spielen sich mehr nicht kein Moyshelekh, Shloymelekh. Spielen sich mehr nicht kein Sorgelekh, Leilekh. Nicht auf kein Gräserlach, nicht auf kein Schneelach.
We've received greetings from friends throughout the world that Shane is going to share with us.
Der Melbourner Bund zusammen mit unserer Jugendgruppe der Skiff, der Mond und anerkannte Ghetto-Kämpfer, Partisaner und Frontskämpfer, was haben mit Mut und Heldigkeit sich genommen das Leben in die Hand, kedei sich wiederzustellen gegen die nazische Rotzchen. Bei Jiden ist Zachor aber Fell. Jüdische Geschichte ist nicht das, was sie geschehen zu anderen, aber viele nicht zu unserer Oves. Wir seien befeuillen zu verstehen, seien befreit geworden von Mitzrayim. Und wie der Poet Yankov Gladstein schreibt, Punkt wie mir seien alle gestanden beim Berg Sinai zu Matten Teure, also seien wir alle gestorben in die Gaskammern von Lublin. Schon 80 Jahre, was der Melbourner Bund an Überpflanzung und Wiederwuchs von der Bewegung in Europa merkt ab dem 19. April, Punkt in der Date von Aufstand in Varshever Ghetto. Wir bleiben direkt verbunden mit unseren Brüdern und Schwestern, gleich die Bundische wie mit Klal Yisrael, wo seien dort umgekommen in heldischen Kampf oder in bitterer Schlacht. Wir ermahnen mit tiefen Treue alle von den ermordeten 6 Millionen, hereingerechnet 1,5 Millionen jüdische Kinder oder mehr, wo seien ermordet geworden in unbeschreiblichen Bedingungen durch Hunger, Krieg, Keulen und Gaskammern. Wir anerkennen mit Besteuerung die Scheres Pleite, was haben übergelebt die Milchome und haben aufs Neue aufgebaut jüdische Kehilles, Institutions und ein Leben, wird zu versichern dem Kiem von unser Volk noch im dritten Churben. Zusammen mit euch merken wir ab die Dose Date, kedei jeder von den 6 Millionen und die Welt von wannen sie haben gestammt, soll keinmal nicht vergessen werden. Was weiter die Geschehnissen fallen herein in der Geschichte, als wichtiger ist, als wir sollen nicht vergessen. Covid sehr Andenk, Bundische Organisation in Melbourne. And from the Vorsitzers of the SCIF, Leilish Carmeli Volsky and Chaim Borowitz, we at SCIF mark this 81st anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising to remember the immense bravery with which the resistance fighters did not let the Nazis pick the time and place of their deaths. During the Churban, many Jewish youth groups, such as our own, resisted physically and also through continuing Jewish education and cultural life. We believe it is imperative that we educate our Skifisten about the uprising, not only as the last direct descendants of the Jewish Labor Bund and Skif in Europe, but as young Jews who must engage with and learn from our history. As Shmerke Kaczerginski wrote in his song Yugnt-himen, ewig wollen wir verbinden unser Nächten mit den Heint. Our Skifisten, as the custodians of these stories, represent the Heint, the present, tasked with honoring the Kämpfers as well as all of the 6 million whose lives were murderously stolen. Dem 19. April ist geworden a Gelegenheit zu dermonnen nicht nur die jüdische Karbonis vom Varshever Ghetto Aufstand, nur die alle 6 Millionen, die sind umgebracht in Europa. Covid sehr lichtigen Andenk der Skif. And to hear the Yugnt-himen, to sing it for us, we now have Joanne Bortz.
Our song is full of sadness. Our story is full of sadness. But young and old, we are the future. You know this song. This isn't a solo. This is a song that we can all sing together. Unser Lied ist voll mit Treue. Der Rest ist unser Untergang. Hotsch der Säune wacht beim Teuer, stürmt Jugend mit Gesang. War jung ist jeder, wer es will, nur Jungen haben kein Partei. Alte kennen euch sein Kinder von einer neuen freie Zeit. Wer es wogelt wegen, wer mit Dreistkeit stellt sein Fuß, bringt die Jugend sehr entgegen von dem Ghetto Ageros. War jung ist jeder, wer es will, nur Jungen haben kein Badeit. Alte kennen euch sein Kinder von einer neuen freie Zeit. Wir gedenken alle Sonnen, mir der Monnen alle Freund. Ewig wollen wir verbinden unser Nächten mit den Heint. War jung ist jeder, wer es will, nur Jungen haben kein Badeit. Alte kennen euch sein Kinder von einer neuen freie Zeit.
I'd like to ask our other singers, Shifee and Sarah, would you please come up? The words for our two closing songs appear in transliteration on the back of your program. If you'd like to join us, we ask that you please do. And if you'd kindly stand and sing with us, we'd appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of our organizing committee, Shane Baker, Feygele Jacobs, myself, Marcel Kshensky, and Moshe Rosenfeld. I'd like to thank all our participants. Thank you so much for creating this event. Please join us as we lay flowers on Der Stein, and thank you so much. Get home safely.